Hello, and welcome to a quick informal video on how financial ratios are used in ScenariosX, made by PlanTechHub. My name is Chad Blythe. I'm founder and CEO of PlanTechHub and main designer of ScenariosX. We'll begin by first logging into the system. I click on the login button, pick what account I want to log into. I'm going to log into our help account here, use my passkey, which I'm using as a fingerprint scan that I have on my keyboard. Automatically brings me in. For those of you that have not checked out the passkey and how that works, please check out our video on how to set up the passkey. It's really super simple and saves a significant amount of time when logging in. When we come to this page, this is going to be our very first introduction to financial ratios. Before I go in there, let me kind of talk a little bit about financial ratios and why you don't see them in financial planning software today. Ever since the financial planning software kind of in its current iteration came out in the 1990s, all of a sudden financial ratios went away, even though it's a standard that's taught to all financial professionals, financial advice professionals, whether they have CFP programs in universities or whether it's just part of the standard curriculum of being taught how to give financial advice. We use these rule of thumb type of ratios to be able to kind of get an idea of where we are inside of our financial health. Well, no different in financial planning software, but why don't we see them in financial planning software? I think the reason why is because when financial planning software first came out, the idea was that, like if we're kind of projecting out dollar per dollar of the entire someone's life, do we really need these rule of thumb type of numbers? And there are situations where maybe, financial ratios aren't very useful. Now, we have a bunch of financial ratios. Not all of them are going to be useful in every situation, but there's very few plans where there's not some ratios that aren't very useful, that they should be very useful into the plan. I think they're very useful for not just someone understanding better what's happening to their plan, but I think they're absolutely critical for advisors to showcase their skills, not just the client's diagnostic of the current situation, but when looking at our advice and what our advice does to a plan, I think they're absolutely critical of being able to point out what's happening throughout the lifetime of the plan. So let's go ahead and jump into financial ratios here in our system. When I come here to the dashboard page, I'm going to skip over to the far right section here, which is financial health. And this is our first introduction to ratios. You can see they're in 4 different categories: income, debt, liquidity, and investments. So several different types. Again, not every single ratio is going to be useful for every single plan. When you have clients that have enough money, emergency fund isn't going to be something that they're too concerned about. Maybe their debt to assets is not really something to be concerned about if they have plenty of money. But the point is that just about every single plan has usefulness in some of these ratios, which is why they're here in the first place. So even though we're looking at ratios right now, realize that we're only looking at ratios that are affecting the client's current plan. So this is what they're currently doing for themselves. So when we're looking at their emergency fund, this is a snapshot of where they are today. But we want to be able to go further than that, right? Like we want to be able to not just look at today, but if we're giving advice or even just diagnosing the current plan, we want to be able to look at what's happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now, so forth and so on. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and jump into my most patriotic client, which is Georgia Martha Washington. So I'm going to click on Georgia Martha, automatically takes me to their profile page. And even though I've got funding rate and success rate as kind of our 2 main metrics, those aren't really the financial ratios that I'm talking about inside of our system. But one thing I will point out is that every single time you see results in our system, there is a details button available. So when I click on details, it takes me to another page that's allowing me to kind of see various ways of looking at the details of the plan. The very last one is financial ratios. Again, this isn't just looking at a snapshot of what's currently happening within the system. This is allowing us to see these financial ratios throughout the entire lifetime of the plan. So when we're looking at emergency fund, it's great if it starts off, you got 27 months, 36 months, 35 months. But what if we make a decision that takes away our spending power or our buying power in the future? So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we suddenly see that number jump down to 2 months or 0 months. That is important. That is something to educate, and it's something to communicate to our clients. Again, financial planning or building a plan isn't just about the client seeing the results. It's about us showcasing our ability to diagnose their situation and to educate and communicate it to them. So financial ratios, I believe, are critical for that purpose. So this isn't the only place where you see these ratios. Inside of our system, if I were to kind of leave this page and maybe go over to what is our suggested actions, financial ratios can also be metrics inside of our system, just like we see total debt ratio, interest coverage ratio. When we make changes in the system, we can see on the fly as we're making changes the changes to those ratios. So we don't have to go to details to look at the results. We can bring up the most important ones that are there for us. So maybe a certain scenario that we're utilizing or coaching with or educating our client is about debt, or it's about liquidity, or about the investments. What we can do is not just change the graph to match what we're talking about, but we can also put up the most relevant ratios in there as well, so that we're seeing how they change on the fly. Well, that's ratios in a nutshell. Definitely check out our other videos to learn more about how you can use PlanTechHub to better serve your clients. And we hope that we get an opportunity to see you soon. And if you have any questions about the system or like to check out a free trial, please go to our homepage and do so. Thanks for joining us.